How do you deal with heartbreak? Although we don't have all the time in the world, I will still take you away from the usual British landscapes which we look at to an altogether different place. Because literature is not just about one man or woman writing. It's like a voice churned out of a landscape through a generational memory which is unique to every place. Look at the map of South America. Let's now look at what sounds and yes looks like Chile. Now, do you see this place there, Parallel? It's a small agricultural place in southern Chile. On 12th of July 1904, a person called Ricardo Eliza Neftali Reis y Bosualto was born there. We now know him as Pablo Neruda. His mother was a school teacher and she died shortly after his birth. His father, he was a railway employee and did not support his literary interests. Yet, Pablo Neruda started writing when he was 13. But why he took this pseudonym? He did this after the Czech journalist and writer, poet and art critic Jan Nepo Magneruda, who supported the Czech national revival and promoted Czech nationalism. So we can say that Pablo Neruda was a person who definitely supported the causes of socialism and he was a very vociferous communist. What is strange is that he took this pseudonym up when he was in early teens. What were we doing when we were in our early teens? So now you do have him in perspective, right? You do have the attention that he deserves. He officially adopted this pen name or made this an official pen name or pseudonym in 1946. Now, he wrote in various styles and genres, and interestingly, the poem which we will be reading today is a very soft kind of a love poem, you can say, when you think about the political agenda he was or the activism he was engaged with. So on one hand, he was writing love poems, and on the other, he was writing political manifestos. We see him spending most of his writing career in Santiago. He had left southern Chile, his homeland or his birthplace, in around 1921. He wanted to be a French teacher, but somehow he became a writer. And while in Santiago, he completed one of his most noted and best works, which was an anthology, and the title may be translated in English as 20 Love Poems and a Song of Despair. This whole series was inspired by an affair which he had when he was young and then the eventual heartbreak. Tonight I Can Write is part of that anthology. So now we know the context of this poem. So what is this poem about? Of course, it's a poem about sadness which the poet felt when he lost his beloved and he went through this heartbreak. At the same time, it's a poem about a certain kind of displacement which he was feeling. Because you see, he was away from his place of birth and he was new to this town, Santiago. And sometimes you have these differences in cultural perspectives, and it takes time for, especially if you are a teenage person, it takes time for you to adjust in the new circumstances. And somehow the old way of life, the old place appears to be more inviting. So that is what nostalgia is. So this poem is on one hand about his emotional reaction to his heartbreak. At the same time, about his sense of loss and despair in being displaced from his original place. You often read this poem in the paper under post-colonial literature. Maybe at the end of this video, we will discuss some relevance of this poem to this whole idea of post-colonialism. But we will first look at the lines of the poem to understand what it actually means on a literal level. Now, I should inform you beforehand that we can read only the English version or the translated version of this poem. This poem was originally written in Spanish. Tonight I can write the saddest lines. Write, for example, the night is starry and the stars are blue and shiver in the distance. The night wind revolves in the sky and sings. Somebody is speaking to us. Who is the speaker? The poet. We presume it's the poet. It has an autobiographical air about it. And if the poet intended it to be somebody else, he would have mentioned that at least in the title. So he thinks that this night, when he is writing this poem, is a sad night, and this night is appropriate for him to write a sad poem. Alright, and then he says, write, for example, so it's a conversational way of talking, and this is very unusual when you look at the usual conventions poets were adopting during the time of publication of this poem. So he was doing something radically different from other poets of his time. He says that tonight is the night for him to write sad lines, for example, and then he gives example of a line. The night is starry and the stars are blue and shiver in the distance. So all these images are conventional ones. When poets write about their heartbreak or their experience of sadness, they usually refer to these starry nights and how they feel loss and despair looking at the big sky. So he is kind of using this as an ironical statement, and he says that these are the usual ways in which conventional poets deal with their sadness. And then he comes to his situation. The night wind revolves in the sky and sings. And then he says again, tonight I can write the saddest lines. So it comes as a musical refrain. So he goes on telling that he is supposed to write sad lines because this night is appropriate for that. Now, when you look at the example which he has given earlier, he has used the expression, stars are blue and shiver in the distance. So, notice that there is an element of personification here, that stars are shivering. When does somebody shiver? Either they are cold or they are scared. So, none of these apply to situations where there is any kind of happiness. So we can presume that the stars represent his own feelings and they represent the loss, the despair which he is feeling. And the word blue is usually associated with death and stillness. So unlike Shakespeare's Northern Star metaphor in his sonnet, he is referring to the stars as being dead and lost themselves. So how can they give any direction? The night wind revolves in the sky and sings. So not just the stars, the wind is also personified here because the wind is singing. After the refrain, we come to the part where he comes to the main point. I loved her and sometimes she loved me too. Sometimes was she erratic? Was her love not uniform and constant like his? Let's see. Through nights like this one, I held her in my arms. I kissed her again and again under the endless sky. Now he is transposing us to some past moment when the night was as starry and brilliant as this night, but he had his beloved with him. And they spent very amorous moments. They were in each other's arms, and he describes that last moment with a lot of love we can understand. She loved me. Sometimes I loved her too. Now he says he sometimes loved her. What is it like? This time he is saying he loved her sometimes, which means his love was not constant. So we don't know what the situation was here from this, but we see a kind of uncertainty in the way he is describing their mutual emotions towards each other. How could one not have loved her great still eyes? So, of course, this woman had very beautiful eyes and he loved her. So, this is pretty conventional for any poet to describe the beauty of the person he or she is in love with, and he does exactly that. And then we come to the refrain. Refrain is any line which is repeated deliberately to create an effect. Tonight, I can write the saddest lines. So that night, I loved her, I kissed her. Tonight, like right now, she is gone and all I can do is write. So in a way for him, writing is an experience that allows him a kind of freedom, liberation. From what? From the pain which he is feeling. It would help him in a way to cope with loss, and he actually gives the reason here. Tonight I can write the saddest lines. To think that I do not have her. To feel that I have lost her. So look at these short sentences. It makes a kind of a deliberate pause, as if he's trying to figure out his own emotions in this way. To hear the immense night, still more immense without her. Earlier he had referred to the sky as endless. But the moment there is an absence of his beloved, then the immensity of the sky, the endlessness of the sky doesn't become a positive thing, but it becomes something which actually suffocates him. So when something is immensely spread in front of you, you should feel more liberated, but he is feeling threatened by the immensity of nature around him. And the verse falls to the soul like dew to the pasture. So just like dewdrops, his lines of poetry, they are trying to revive him, trying to quench his thirst in a way. And this is a very beautiful simile that he uses. What does it matter that my love could not keep her? The night is starry and she is not with me. So while on one hand nature is depicted as endless and limitless, love is shown to be a transient thing, something which is temporary, which ends, she is gone. So he is juxtaposing nature and human emotions, human relationships. This is all. In the distance, someone is singing. In the distance. We do not find a lot of uniformity in length of sentences that he uses. It's like there's a big flow he's having, an inspiring line he writes, and then suddenly he is distracted by things that are actually happening to him. So there is a kind of a dichotomy, a difference between what he is sensing with his 5 sense organs right now when he's writing and his thoughts, his nostalgia. So when he is talking about his thoughts, when he is talking about emotions, he is using longer sentences, and when he's talking about his actual physical sensations at this moment, he's using short sentences. My sight tries to find her as though to bring her closer. My heart looks for her and she is not with me. He is trying to reach out to this woman with all his 5 senses and his emotion, but she is inaccessible. She is out of bounds for him. Now, what really is very interesting here is that he is saying that love is temporary, nature is permanent. And that sounds logical and realistic. But when you set these lines against, say, Shakespeare's sonnet, shall I compare thee, and think about what he actually says there, that summer's lease hath all too short a date, but thy eternal summer shall not fade. So summer will fade, you will not fade. So that was Shakespeare. Neruda says that no, nature will be here, nature was there when you were with me, nature is still here in the same way when you are not with me. So nature is permanent, human beings are temporary. At least relationships are temporary. So he is more genuine, he sounds more reasonable here than even Shakespeare. The same night whitening the same trees. Of course, it's not the same night. The night when she was with him was a different night. But somehow nature has a certain kind of uniformity, consistency. Therefore, nature often repeats itself. You have a similar rainy day at regular intervals. And this creates this idea that nature is something which stays on forever. It's the way in which Wordsworth and Shelley, they looked at nature, something which is a very powerful and permanent force. And compared to that, what humans are, we of that time are no longer the same. So they were in love with each other back then, but even when the night has remained the same, they have changed. So he is reiterating the changeability of human beings, and then he says, I no longer love her. That's certain. But how I loved her. Do you really believe he doesn't love her? I don't think so. Then he wouldn't have been so broken by her going away. My voice tried to find the wind to touch her hearing. So he knows that he doesn't have a direct access to this woman anymore. He at least wanted to speak out something which would reach her eventually. So this longing to be heard, this is very common, right? And then he gives us the real reason why there was this heartbreak. Another's. She will be another's, as she was before my kisses. So this woman who he was engaged to, she was engaged to somebody else before their engagement, and then she is now going to be with someone else. So he mentions it, although with his pain and emotion, but the way he writes it, and see the way the sentences are getting longer. First he says another's, and then he says she will be another's, and then he says as she was before my kisses. It's as if he's trying to figure out the reason and tries to console him in the process, or console himself rather. Her voice, her bright body, her infinite eyes. So somehow there was a link. Although he is saying that nature is endless and all, her eyes were something that he could equate with nature or the endlessness of night. I no longer love her, that's certain, but maybe I love her. So he's contradicting himself. This is honesty. You see, he is not able to understand whether he feels disgust or hatred or love for this woman. Love is so short, forgetting is so long. In his poem, In Memoriam, Tennyson writes these beautiful lines, better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. For Neruda, the problem is the memory. So for one person, memory is a healing thing. For Pablo Neruda, memory is a curse. Because through nights like this one, I held her in my arms, My soul is not satisfied that it has lost her. Memory is triggered by incidents, by similar environment, locations, and every time the night repeats itself, the memory floods his brains. And memory attaches a scene to a certain emotion. So when that scene happens in front of your eyes, that memory hits you, and along with it, it brings all the emotions too. Though this be the last pain that she makes me suffer, and these the last verses that I write for her. He is using his poetry as a consolation to get himself some closure. So what does he do? Does he write the saddest lines here? He begins by saying that this night is appropriate for writing the saddest lines. But he never says that these are the saddest lines which he is going to write or which he has written. So somehow I feel that maybe these are not the lines he was talking about. He actually tries to say that tonight I can write the saddest lines. For example, this, that, this, but I will not be able to write them because I'm feeling so lost. Usually we feel that suffering leads to creativity, but that suffering has to be sorted in the minds of the creator. The creator has to cope with the suffering. Otherwise, there will be disorder. And he shows us this disorder. Now, I want you to look at certain unusual things that we come across in this poem. First is, of course, usually in love poems, we see poets trying to immortalize their beloved or keep their memories alive forever. Here, the poet is seeking forgetfulness. He is asking for some self-imposed amnesia. So this is a very unique kind of honesty we see, a straightforwardness, which was not there in poetry, trust me, when he was writing. And the second thing that makes this poem very unique is this use of caesura. There are two ways in which poets manipulate line lengths. One is enjambment and the other is caesura. In enjambment, what happens? The line doesn't end, or rather the sentence doesn't end where the line ends. So it flows down to the next line. So that gives an effect of a flow of emotions. Here, on the contrary, we have very short sentences, sometimes breaking one single line into 2-3 sentences. So that creates a jarring effect, a pause. It stops the flow. And why is he using it? Because he wants to communicate the exact nature of his thoughts. And when experiencing this kind of trauma or heartbreak, usually people do not think in straight lines, okay, taking long flows of thoughts. Thoughts are disrupted, distracted. And so somehow, look at this line for instance, this is all. In the distance someone is singing, in the distance. As if he's trying to figure out, what went wrong? Well, what did I do wrong? So this fragmented sentences, balancing different elements of a sentence, to give what is being said, the sound of cold logic. So that is something we see here. So there is on one hand an element of logicality in him, and on the other hand, brutal honesty that he can't deal with his sorrow. Sometimes he says that I love her, sometimes he doesn't know if he does. The third important aspect of this structure is the way he is presenting to you the lines. They are in the form of couplets, 2 lines together, but they are unrhymed. Because of breakup, when lines rhyme, they give off an air of togetherness. That's why sonnets have these rhyming patterns. But in this case, There is no regular meter. Grief is not possible to be chained down in any meter. And then he is feeling not in rhyme with the person he loved so much. So this break of rhyme is kind of relatable to the emotion which he is feeling. But then, the most interesting thing is that when you look at the original Spanish poem, although I don't know Spanish, I presume many of you don't too, but we thankfully can see the words. For example, in these 3 couplets which I have selected for you, you see how the sentences end. Quiero olvido, brazos perdido, cosa escribo. So Spanish gives you more freedom when it comes to rhymes, because many of their words, they end with vowel sounds. But even then, these are not exact rhymes of each other. See, olvido, perdido, escribo. They sound as if they have the same kind of ending, but they are not exactly rhyming words. So we can call these pseudo-rhymes. The translation takes away this subtle pseudo-rhyme system. This zone, between rhyme and non-rhyme is the zone of memory after a heartbreak. Do I love her anymore? Have I forgotten her totally? And then there is the zone of pseudo-love and pseudo-memory, which he is experiencing and which can only be reflected through these half rhymes we are getting. Where you love and do not love, where you rhyme and do not rhyme. The aspect which bugs many students is that why is this poem given in the paper of post-colonialism? Because post-colonialism sounds like a very heavy, cumbersome term and you have to deal with so many terms there. See, post-colonialism is actually about liberating yourself from these definitions. It's about going beyond conventions. Colonialism means when a place is occupied by an imperial power. And what happens when that power goes away? How do the people of that place negotiate with this kind of freedom they have obtained? Post-colonialism is also about understanding the different ways in which literature can be produced, which do not accept or which do not conform to the regular accepted modes of European cultures. So, poetry will not be anymore judged by the standards set by T.S. Eliot or F.R. Lewis. Students of literature, especially students of English literature, will not just read English poems, but also translations of Spanish poems, Bengali poems, Hindi poems, Urdu novels. So, post-colonialism validates the literatures of the whole world, irrespective of their languages. Sometimes it creates some problems, like we have seen in this case, the beauty is gone. But then at least you know about this poet. And that creates an interest. When you have interest in somebody's writings, then you start having interest in their nation, in their cultures. When I was showing you the map of Chile, I told you that it's a place in South America and there is Andes Mountains. Many of you already know where Chile is. But do you know how it looks like? How his birthplace looks like? Look at this photograph on the screen. This is his birthplace. It's not congested. It has a lot of air, openness. And so, when he says endless nights, starry nights, we cannot even imagine the kind of scenery in front of him. Unless, of course, you are a student who is sitting there in Kashmir or in some coastal area. And then, trust me, you are really blessed, my dear. So, post-colonialism gives validation to these alternative ways of writing poetry. All right. Does he write the saddest lines? What do you think? Or is his sadness too much to let him create anything? You be the judge. Personally, I don't find the poem too sad. Maybe because I am not sad right now. Back in my days of heartbreak, maybe I would have wept if I read this poem. So we can say he's creating a moment for the readers, and only the one who is feeling in a similar way can relate to it, and only that person can understand the sadness of the poem. I hate the fact that it is prescribed in the syllabus. Who does that? Takes away the sense. But then, would you have read Neruda otherwise? And if this poem has generated interest in you, read up the rest of the poems in this anthology. I'm sure you would really love them. Because the people who made him famous, they didn't have him in their syllabus. They truly liked these words because you can relate to this. His expressions are so direct, realistic, devoid of unnecessary imagery that you can directly relate to it. So, I hope you have enjoyed today's class. We will take up more texts from this section, and I think most of the universities, they have prescribed this in their 6th semester post-colonialism part. We will be doing David Malouf if possible, and Mamang Dai too. So, this is Monami Mukherjee signing off. See you all in my next video. Till then, stay happy, stay subscribed. Bye-bye.